This is our third session of our webinar series. And like I said earlier, we are showcasing the case studies. So we've got 50 new case studies within the toolkit, and 7 of those are available on the website as well. I would like to say, first of all, a huge thank you to the project team for this. It was a large scale project. So much work went on to get in the 50 case studies from a variety of schools across the UK. Matt is going to go into a bit more detail about that in a moment, as he was the project lead. And we've also got some of the other project participants here as well today. So hopefully Moira, Graham, I'm not sure if Andrew managed to make it, but if you've got anything you want to add as we go through, please feel free. And we've also got Claire Shearer here from the Naval Children's Charity, and they were very kind in funding this project as well. So first of all, if I passed you over to Claire, who was going to say a few words about the project, and then we'll go over to Matt, the project's lead.
Hello, everybody. Yes, we were absolutely delighted to fund this project. We thought it was incredibly important. For those of you who don't know, the Naval Children's Charity we are single service. We're focused primarily on naval children. So the core bit of our work is giving grants to naval children to help them overcome the challenges that they face. And we do that by giving grants to children in crisis, families in crisis, but we also have a whole range of work to try and help them overcome the challenges. And this is where the work with Skip comes in, because all our service children experience quite a lot of challenges, as we know from armed forces life. And we think it's really important that we understand those and we all come together to try and overcome those. I do want to point out one thing we have on our website, which, if none of you know about it, it's a piece of work called Doing Distance, and it is free downloadable resources to help you with young people, young service children that you work with or in your family, to help them understand the impact of separation and loss. And so have a look. There's some really nice downloadable practical things that you can do with young people. I can put a link in the chat as well. I'll do that. So we do quite a lot of work with Skip. I chair their management group, and I do what I can to really ensure that even though we're single service, we're really working together across the whole sector, driving forward understanding and change so that our children's lives can just be improved and their outcomes improved. These case studies, I think, are just so important because, as we know, there's cases across schools across the UK. Some have lots of young people, some only have 1 or 2. So it's really important that schools understand, engage with the toolkit, but understand good examples of what might help them as a school when they've only got, say, 2 children. So I'm just delighted that the work that's been done, and I reiterate my thanks to all the team that did it. It really was an enormous piece of work, and I really hope that there's lots of benefit to be had from them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind popping the link in the chat, I think that'd be really helpful so people can access it easily. I'm now going to pass you over to Matt, who was the project's lead of this. Like we said, it was a very, very large undertaking, and Matt's going to go into more detail about the project itself and how that all the organisation and all the background work behind the project as well. So I'll pass over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see so many people on the call, some faces that are familiar and some faces that are new. I think it's very important to stress right from the word go that this was a collaborative piece of work that involved 50 schools and school leaders, but also a fabulous team that I worked with, 2 of whom are on this call. So hello, Moira from Scotland, and please, Moira, do chip in during the slides when you think I've missed something out or if I've got something wrong. And then similarly, Graham Shepherd, who is also on the call and was a former chair of the Service Children in State Schools National Executive, or SCIS, long-term head teacher in Catterick Garrison, and is currently a governor in a school with a large number of service children. And I think it would be fair to say, Moira, that Graham's role was to keep us on track and to provide that sage advice from experience as we hit various pitfalls, which clearly projects like this normally do. Vicky, would you be able to share the slides again, please, or do you want me to share slides from my end?
It might be easier for you, just so you can click through at your pace rather than telling me when to click.
Right, in that case, I will do just that. But you'll have to just give me one moment just to share my screen. Okay. So if we start with just thinking about the purpose of the case study project, the Thriving Lives Toolkit itself and the self-evaluation framework that is a key part of the toolkit has been around for a few years now. And for those that have used it, you'll be quite familiar with the 3 levels of self-evaluation question. And for those that are not, in essence, schools are asked to look at 40 areas of work across 7 strands or principles of provision in schools, and reflect on whether they feel their school is currently at an emerging stage of development, or at a developing stage, or at an embedding stage. And whilst I'd want to certainly keep Ofsted well away from all of this, I think you could probably summarise those 3 stages as needing improvement, and perhaps as being securely good, developing, or being really outstanding at the embedding side. But the problem with the toolkit on its own was that it lacked rigour. There was a lot of subjectivity in how schools might decide on one of the 40 questions where it was placed. And there weren't really tangible examples, only generic case studies, but tangible, clear examples of how a school leader could look to others in the sector to see what it looks like in practice. And so the aim was to try and help schools be able to make that more rigorous approach to the work they were doing in evaluating their provision. We clearly wanted to highlight good practice. There was a big debate as to whether we should or we shouldn't case study schools that were at the emerging stage of development. And we eventually decided that we wouldn't, that we would really focus on schools that were both at the developing stage and at the embedding stage. And we would provide, via those schools, ideas of how other schools could enhance their provision. So that was the key broad project scope. And I worked at the time for Oxfordshire County Council, and I think it's important to state that Oxfordshire Council were the budget holders for this project, and they also need acknowledgement. It was if it wasn't for the foresight of the Assistant Director Kim James, I certainly wouldn't have been involved in this project. So what were the key considerations that the project team had when we came to sort of think about how to case study 50 schools? Well, the first thing was I needed to have a team of people around me. There was no way that I was going to be able to case study 50 schools on my own. And I was very conscious that we needed a geographical spread. And I don't work in Scotland, and I don't have strong links in Wales. And we absolutely needed to make sure that we had involvement of schools from our devolved nations. So that was why I approached Moira, who's an independent advisor up in Scotland with a lot of experience. And maybe at this point, Moira, I ought to let you just come off mute and introduce yourself.
Right, thanks, Matt. I, for many, many years, was a primary head teacher in a school where we had about anything from 40 to 60% of armed forces, pupils from armed forces families. After retiring from there, I was for 9 years education manager with a charity supporting armed forces youngsters. And when I retired from there, I've been an independent advisor. I still work with small projects at schools. So I was absolutely delighted to be able to take part in this UK-wide project.
Thank you, Moira. And the other member of the team who's not on the call at the moment was Andy Hayes. And Andy, also a former head teacher of a number of schools that have service children in, for many years was a senior advisor for Hampshire Advisory Service. And he had the oversight for service children in Hampshire. And Hampshire has the largest proportion of all service children in the UK as a local authority. So he had lots of links with lots of schools. And I was in close liaison with other significant partners. So, for example, Millie Taylor, who works in Wales, who oversees the project that supports service children in Wales. And that gave me access to schools in Wales. We were also very keen that we didn't just promote the work of primary schools. And I was delighted that we managed to engage 9 secondary schools, which is approximately 20% of the total of the 50, with the remaining schools being either primary or infant or junior or federation schools, so essentially the primary sector. Then came the thorny issue of not just celebrating the converted. And what I mean by that is, we know that there is some fantastic practice in schools that have very high numbers of service children. I currently live in North Yorkshire. I was a deputy head at REF Leaming. REF Leaming County Primary School currently has 100% of its role as service children. And if we case studied too many schools with that proportion, that wouldn't really help the schools that just have a very small number and don't quite know what to do with the very limited amount of funding that they get for those pupils. So what we did is we decided on a threshold of a third, 33%, and we tried to get a balance of the majority of schools case studied would have fewer than 33% of service children on their roll, and only 40% would have a larger proportion. We then had to make sure that we didn't end up with 50 case studies all of schools that are in areas with heavily army children, because then, rightly so, there would be shouts of protests from those that live in near to RAF bases or those that deal mainly with naval families. So we needed a cross section of the 3 services, and then we had a big long debate around our role in quality assurance. We were asking essentially schools and approaching schools and asking them to volunteer to be a case study school. And we didn't want to put them off by saying, and by the way, by doing that in a voluntary capacity, you'll have an advisor quality assuring the work you do. So there needs to be a certain amount of taking schools' opinions and views on trust. But then equally, we were very conscious that if we just simply took schools' word for it and published case studies without some sort of checks and balances, then we could be misleading schools in what provision might look like. So we had to strike a balance, and that was what led us to deciding that the absolute number one thing we had to do first, and I would say that probably this is the most important part of the case study project, is that we needed to exemplify what the 40 questions might look like at the 3 different levels of provision. So the starting point really was to take the 3 levels, emerging, developing and embedding, and look at the generic guidance that had been in existence since the toolkit was first created back in 2016-17, I believe, and to pad that out a little bit more. So we did that, and that document sort of sits as an overarching document to all of the exemplification materials. But these exemplification materials are absolutely key, and in a short while I'll show you where you can access them in the online toolkit. And whilst that's quite a small image, and for the purposes of today's webinar, you don't need to know the details. What that shows is 4 questions under one of the principles, with the 3 columns in white that have bullet points next to them that describes what that question looks like at emerging or at developing or at embedding practice, allowing school leaders to either rag rate electronically or print them off and scribble over them and highlight them and then apply a best fit measure to try and determine where they feel their school sits. So when a school agreed to be a case study school, which required quite a bit of massaging of egos and telling them how wonderful they were, and pointing to their good practice that we were aware of or we'd heard about. We then shared the exemplification or the guidance materials with them for just one principle. And I think that's a really important point to stress. You're not going to find one of these 50 case studies that will case study provision across all 7 areas of the Thriving Lives Toolkit. That would become not a case study, but a book. I think it's much more precise and targeted. So there are approximately 7 case studies per principle, 7 7's 49, so give or take. And we asked each school leader, working with relevant members of staff, to highlight the document that you can see in front of you, which went through lots of iterations and involved lots of people to chip in with. I mean, we had experts in the research of children's voice, for example, looking at Principle 5, Children Are Heard. We engaged with our colleagues in Wales and Scotland to make sure that they were happy with the wording on the exemplification materials. And once we'd got those in place, we then asked our 50 school leaders to complete and review one of these, irrespective of whether they were already users of the Thriving Lives Toolkit or whether or not actually they'd never used it before, but we just knew that they had good practice. From that, we then had a detailed online meeting with the leads, where we were able to, for want of a better phrase, soft quality check what they were saying. We were able to look at what schools believed that they were doing, unpick that a little bit, question it, and reassure ourselves that yes, this was a school that was securely at the developing stage of provision for Principle X, or was at the embedding stage for that particular principle. So it was a very rigorous approach. And before I move on to sharing what the case studies look like and the design of them, if you've not seen them before, I'll just take this opportunity to either invite Moira or Graham to add to something that you feel I may have missed, or for anyone to ask any questions about the guidance materials before I turn on to the actual case studies.
I think just to say, Matt, that the terminology is really important. Obviously, for example, things like the funding and the service bureau premium was okay in England, but not, of course, in Scotland, for example. So it was really important that the language that we sought was relevant to all children in all schools anywhere. And that was really important in terms of the approach.
Yeah, I would echo that, Graham. And I could say we spent many long head scratching hours, days, weeks on this, but it was really welcomed by the schools who saw it, and they thought, yeah, this is something this is a very useful tool, and it was the exemplification that really grabbed their attention. So it was well worth all the time that we spent on it.
Yes, absolutely. Vicky.
Hello, mine's not so much of a question, but something else that I think is really helpful with this is schools that are setting themselves objectives. They can see the next level up and think, oh, that could be set as our objective the next time. So it's not just helpful for the evidence of what you're doing now, but also for the next steps for setting objectives for the future to how to get up that ladder, up the ladder within the toolkit, like you said, from developing to embedding, for example.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And just going back to the point of language, which is a very important one, I noticed that in the chat, Phil has absolutely rightly just pointed out that if we're thinking of self-assessment levels linked to, say, Ofsted, we need to make sure that we're also thinking about it in terms of ESTIN in Wales and Education Scotland frameworks. You know, the whole of the Thriving Lives toolkit, exemplification materials and case studies are written in a language which works for all UK children that go to UK schools. Okay, so if we then move on to the look of the actual case studies. And they are fairly colourful. They're not massively long. They're 3 to 4 pages of A4. They can be printed out and make for really quite an attractive, easy, quick read reference tool. But each has a similar format. And again, we spent a lot of time and we took a lot of advice and tested out a variety of formats before we came and made a decision on the final version. So each of the case studies has a color coding linked to the principle. So all the principles in the actual Thriving Lives toolkit are color coded, and that then works all the way through. So you're seeing the purple version at the moment for that principle. Each has the schools self-evaluation, self-assessment, both for each question in the principle, and there are roughly 5 to 7 questions per principle, and an overall self-assessment that is derived from the cumulative part of the 6 or 7 questions. There's a context bit which states the educational phase, and that's written in large, and then a context of the school to give people a better understanding about whether or not this is a school that sits next to a camp or some distance away, and the proportion of service children at the school. You can see on that front cover of that particular case study, there's the map of the UK. Each one has got that map on with a dot of where the school is. We've put website links in throughout so that people can access the school's website, but also if there are certain materials that are referenced and are available on the school's website, then other schools can access those and have a look at those. And there were discussions and questions and permissions granted with school leaders about including those websites. There's always a summary section, which is, I suppose, a bit of an overview exec summary. And then there's the questions and the guidance with some examples from practice. We also tried to make sure that we got a quote from a significant person, whether it be the head teacher or a service child's lead or a parent or even a service child themselves, and embedded that in. So as an example, here's an infant school in St Michael's Church of England infant school. And front page has got the school context and the map. Page 2 then has the overall self-assessment guidance, and then the examples from that school for each of the questions. So there's 2 questions on that page. Questions 3, 4, and 5 are on page 3. Then there is some advice directly from the leader at the bottom, which I think, you know, having shared these with a number of schools now, that is very well received. People find that really helpful. Another example here, we've got a large secondary school in Portsmouth, or in Gosport, Broome Park, with Bay House. So it's a collaboration of 2 secondary schools, very different context, similar sort of format, as you can see, the school context, the map, a couple of visuals, and then the overall self-assessment, and then examples from practice for each of the questions link to this particular case study that runs to 4 pages. We've tried to include photographs where they will add value and I suppose illustrate certain parts that are written, but clearly if you're doing a case study as this one is on achievement is maximized, it's a little bit difficult to show photographs that demonstrate how that happens, whereas if you're doing perhaps something linked to principle 6 and parents are engaged, some photos of how you engage parents is a lot easier to do. Okay, so that's a 5-page case study, and there's some school leader advice again on the background. Now, when I've shared these materials and some of these case studies with schools that I work in, for those that had already used the Thriving Lives Toolkit and tried to evaluate themselves against those 3 broad headings across the 40 questions, they've then looked at particularly the exemplification guidance materials, and they have said this is a game changer. The Thriving Lives Toolkit was never designed to be a one-stop shop, one event process. One event. It is a process. And I will regularly say to schools, look, there are 7 principles, and if you're really going to go into it in depth and review them thoroughly, then you probably need to just be focusing on 1 principle per term and just focus in on the guidance materials and rag rate them before you then upload your evidence and identify next steps or objectives as they are referred to in the toolkit. Okay, I'm going to zip through that one because we've talked about that before. Okay, so in terms of where can you find these, you'll see when you use the online version, you will see at the bottom of each of the 7 principles these 3 yellow rectangles, one of which is the case studies. And if you click onto that, it will show you the case studies linked to that particular principle. There is also another way in which you can see all 50. And please chip in here, Vicky, because this is a relatively new addition to the framework that I haven't used very much. But on the left-hand navigation toolbar, there is now a hyperlink that's called resources. And when you click on that, it will bring up, I think in alphabetical order, all of the 50 schools. And you can then download or just open and view each of the 50 case studies. So 2 different ways of accessing them. Have I got that right?
Yeah, and on this one, on the screen that you're on now, you can see on the right-hand side that you can then filter them. So you can filter them by principle or by educational phase or by location. There's different filter options in there. Again, you can filter them if you've got a lower percentage of service children or higher, which kind of case study you want to look at. And on the previous slide, Matt, on the within the folders, you can see there on the folder to the right of the case study folder, that's where the exemplification documents are for each principle as well, so they're quite easy to get to. There's also a case study from each principle available on the website as well. It's in the resources section of the website, or there's a news item on it. So there is one of each available online, but the others are all within the toolkit.
Yeah, so they're tasters in a way, and if you want to access and get the benefit of all of them, then you really do need to be using the online version, which I think is really important. Now, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and there's at least one hand up, and then I will share my screen and just share one more image of how we went about trying to get a full coverage and representation across schools. But I've noticed that I think, was it Ali, you had your hand up? Or has the question been answered?
I did, Matt, and Vicky just helped to answer my question. I was just going to ask if you had to have a Thriving Lives Toolkit login to be able to access the case studies, but as Vicky's just very happily explained that there are some examples on the website. Just wonder if you've considered enabling access to all of them through the website for those people like myself that aren't completing the evaluation toolkit, but it might be helpful for me to be able to signpost specific case studies to schools to help them.
We have had this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, we have had this discussion. We decided to have some available online and some within the toolkit only, as a bit of a lever to get more schools, obviously trying to get them signed up to the toolkit and come in. So that, like I said, there is one of each on the online on the website that anyone can access, but we didn't want to make them all available online, just to hopefully get more engagement with the toolkit and get more schools signing up and logging in to access the full suite.
And I think to add to that, for colleagues such as yourself and those in your partner family federations and other interested parties that are not actually working full-time in schools, the key thing is to know what it looks like and where you can signpost schools to. And you've got access to some exemplars, because 7 are available to everybody openly on the front page of the website at the moment. But it's something I know that Phil and his team at the Alliance will keep under review. I know that there are developments in train at the moment around the development and the enhancement of the toolkit. And who's to say that things might not be slightly different in time to come. Lou, I can see your hand up. There will be some time for discussion and questions in a moment, but yeah, chip in here.
Sorry, will I put my hand down then, Matt, and ask another time?
No,
I didn't. I thought this was Q&As now. Will I put my hand down? And
well, no, please do ask now, and then I'll share my screen just to show one other thing.
Yeah, no, I just firstly thanks for this, because it's absolutely fantastic the work that has gone in. So well done to you and the team around all of this. And delighted to see Raigmore Primary School in Highland being as one of the case studies. This is purely and utterly just an observation, and Ali Stokes and maybe potentially Moira might also have a view on this. The principle, I'm just going to check which one it is. Principle 4, transition is effective. Systems and support ensure seamless transitions for service children arriving at and leaving school. I didn't know, and this is purely and utterly an observation, whether you are also in relation to this toolkit and that principle in conversations as well with the Safe SG that has a subgroup, a transitions subgroup, which is looking at producing some sort of framework around transitions. And to me, you think, well, we have to join the dots. We have to join the dots and we have to make the links. And this is, as we know, Moira's smiling there, has been going round and round in circles. But what I'm saying is your principle 4, which is clearly around transitions, which is brilliant. But if you also have someone else doing something around transitions and trying to do a national framework for it in order to support, to me, it's joining the dots and being part of that conversation. If you have something that may well help and support and give value to what is in the process of being explored to be developed.
Well,
Ali,
thank you.
Ali, can you help me out with this? Do you know where I'm coming from? To me, it makes a wee bit of sense joining the dots, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Phil, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I can answer that question, Lou. Thank you for it.
Oh, sorry, Phil, I didn't notice you there. My apologies.
That's all right. No, not a problem. Very good question. And we're short on time, so I'll give you a very short answer, which is yes. Okay. We are engaged with Safe SG. The Safe SG chair is a member of the management group that Claire chairs. So we keep close tabs on the developments going on in Scotland and their relationship. Also with the range of other transition isn't the only example of a cross-cutting piece of work. There are others to do with whole school leadership, of course, especially in Scotland, where GERFEC is the mechanism by which schools are thinking about improvement more generally and how this fits into it. I think the thing worth saying is the toolkit is a corralling framework, I think, which provides schools with intelligence to know where to go to get the actual deployment opportunity. How do I do something about this? The toolkit helps you work out where I need to improve, and things like the transition framework in Scotland might be the route they take to make the improvement.
Yep, no, I get it. And the Safe SG, it's a subgroup, transition subgroup, but it is looking at a national one. But I understand what you're saying. All I was saying is it might be something that is worth that principle is linked into this framework.
Can I chip in, Lou, at this point? Because I mean, you raise a really important point, and one of the biggest thorny issues in the whole of this area is that the British military crosses the boundaries of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and schools and education systems often do not. And just talking about, to repeat what you've just said, the development of a national framework. Well, that's not a UK framework, that's a national framework. And we have tried really hard through both the design and development of the original toolkit, but also the creation of the case studies to avoid any specific mentions of something that is national to one country only, and to be really generic. But as Phil quite rightly points out, you know, the whole of the framework is a corralling document, and we need to be signposting and building up that portfolio. So yeah, really good point. And I just wanted to conclude, and then we'll see if there are any further questions before we hand over to Kerry to share a little bit about the Armed Forces Covenant Trust Fund's next SPSP programme. Before I do that, are you now seeing a table that is full of 50 school names? Again, you don't have to worry about the details and the names of the schools. But I wanted to share this to you because when I shared that slide of the considerations, the phase, the location, the size, we ended up really with, well, I can remember at one point physically, a jigsaw puzzle across the whole of my lounge floor, trying to work out how to not over-represent some areas and underrepresent others. So what you've got here in the top half of the table is you've got the case studies or the case study schools that have over a third of their role being service children, and the breakdown of the schools that we exemplified at the embedding stage and those at the developing stage. And you can see that there is representation of all of those at the embedding stage, but not at the developing stage, because we weren't able to find schools. And this is a good piece of news. We weren't able to find schools with very large numbers of service children that are only working at the developing stage of transition is supported and effective and achievement. The other thing to note is that schools in red are the secondary schools. And there's only one secondary school in that top half of the table. And that's because there are very, very few secondary schools across the United Kingdom where the majority of children are from armed forces families. That's why most of our secondary schools appear in the second half of the table. But those with really good eyesight or have been trying to read the names of schools, you'll see that we've got schools with a small a percentage of 2% of their role being service children, exemplified, right up to schools that have got 99 or 100% of their children on roles. And that was deliberate because we wanted each school that wanted to access these to feel that they could find a like school. Because actually, if you've only got a handful of schools, although it might be very interesting to know what they're doing at Cottesmore Academy or RAF Benson or RAF Leaming Primary School, it may not really be that terribly relevant to you because their context is so different and they sit behind a wire. So we really wanted to make sure that schools could find something that fitted in quite nicely with them. And again, we tried to make sure that those local authority areas that are the high numbers, that they're the hard hitters, as it were, you know, where the largest military footprints are, so Hampshire, Yorkshire, Oxfordshire, Lincolnshire. We wanted to make sure that they were well represented, but we also wanted to have some representation for local authorities that have very small numbers and are not one of the top decile local authorities. And of course, that was very hard because we didn't have links with every single local authority. But I'm really pleased to say that across the 50, we've got case studies from Wiltshire, Gloucestershire, Moray, Powys, Argyll and Bute, Hampshire, Glamorgan, Shropshire, the Highlands, Pembrokeshire, Shropshire, Suffolk, Herefordshire. I think there was something in the region of 20 different local authorities, and about a third, sorry, I beg your pardon, about 60% of the schools are in predominantly army areas, 10% in predominantly RAF areas, and 5% in predominantly naval areas, with the balance being sort of a hybrid. Some schools, about 3-4% of schools, had a sort of a mix, an equal mix of either Army and RAF or Army and Navy. And that was roughly in proportion to the sizes of the three armed forces. So I think we managed, didn't we, Moira and Graham, eventually to fit the jigsaw puzzle together. But it got harder and harder as we got nearer to the completion. We were missing pieces, and we had to reach out to schools to try and persuade them to join in. I will say no more other than to ask any questions or to take any observations or reflections on what you've heard in this webinar so far. Okay, well, if there isn't any, we've silenced everybody here, Vicky. I will hand back over to you. Right, Graham's hand up.
Yeah, just to say, and I'm sure Moira would agree, that we're very grateful to Matt, who did have a lot of black hair and full head of hair when he started the project, for his hard work in keeping everything going, because it was a big juggling act, Moira, in a huge job that he did. So well done, mate. We worked together a lot of times. It was a big job, but it was great to work with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. Yeah. He kept us on the straight and narrow path most of the time.
I mean, can I ask a question to our audience, particularly those that come from schools? Have anybody here that not a school that is a case study school, because I know some of those are on the line, but any other schools that have used the case studies yet? Seeing anybody putting their hand up? Okay, well, the second question then, are there any school staff on the line that will now go and locate a case study and have a little look at it? That's the key bit. Oh, Rachel, you're doing the right thing. You're nodding. Fantastic. Ruth, you put your hand up. Thank you. Or maybe you were putting a thumb up saying that you were going to do that, and I mistook it for a hand up question. Okay, right. Well, in that case, I'll hand back over to Vicky, who will take you to the final part of today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Matt. That's been really helpful. I know some people already put in the chat how helpful that's been to give an overview and explain the whole process, and also where to find the case studies and what they include. So thank you so much. We're going to move on now to invite Kerry Newham to speak about, like Matt's already mentioned, the new SPSP programme. So Kerry, you should hopefully be able to share your screen, and Kerry's going to share some information. So you've got, and welcome questions at the end as well for the new programme that they've got that's just been launched.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Hopefully that will come live soon. There we are. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks.
So, a very good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. So I'm Kerry Newham. I'm Armed Forces Families Lead at the Covenant Fund Trust. And on Monday, the 24th of February, we launched the new SPSP for 2025, which we are thrilled about. As you can imagine, we always like getting these funding programs launched and out of the door. So this is an MOD funded program. We've run this over the last few years for them. It's to align to their UK Armed Forces family strategy, and a little bit of change this year in some of the guidance, and actually huge change in the amount of money that our schools and local authorities can apply for. So the aim of the programme remains the same as previously. It's to support service pupils along their educational pathways, enabling them to reach their full potential. So our eligibility remains the same, and we highly recommend reading the guidance around eligibility. You may see there in that yellow box, there is a specific list of who are eligible to apply. And I know on the call there are different organisations and especially charities. Being a charity doesn't exclude you being a part of this programme. All it means is that we would actually have to ask that you be a delivery partner with somebody who could take the lead, who is eligible. So don't think just because you're not listed there, this rules you out completely. Just please go and have a look at the guidance, have a look at the delivery element of working with partners. So the project beneficiaries should be service pupils aged 4 to 18, and this is without exception. This funding is purely for service pupils, and whilst we understand some non-service pupils may have an incidental benefit from this funding, we need to ensure that this is not used as a whole school resource. As I mentioned just briefly there, a change for 2025 is the upper grant limit that can be applied for. MOD have kindly lifted this from 80,000 to 150,000, and we expect projects to deliver within 2 years. And there must be a standalone project. So by standalone, we mean that this project that you're going to apply for should not need continuous funding as we move forward through the years. The further change to the guidance for 2025 is the introduction of a fourth outcome. You'll see it there in band 3. And we ask that your project look to address at least one of these outcomes. That new one is the impact of the mobility, deployment and separation on service pupils' education. That bottom one there, the low number of service pupils, for those who have applied to us before, may remember we've always worked on percentages of service children on roll. That has been taken away this year, and we are just giving you a straightforward number, which we hope will be much more helpful for everybody involved, including us when we're assessing. So when you look at the outcomes and you decide which project your aim will address, please consider the evidence you have of this need. The application will ask you to share this with us, and will also ask you to tell us how you'll measure impact. How will you tell us and MOD that this specific intervention has supported in meeting these outcomes for service children? Which leads me very nicely into the Thriving Lives Toolkit. So within the guidance, you'll find a link to the Skip Alliance Thriving Lives Toolkit supported by MOD, and we highly recommend having a look and considering signing your school up if you haven't already done so. Based on extensive feedback from schools, the tool has proven to be highly practical and can aid in developing both overall strategies and specific project ideas around targeted interventions. Schools suggest using the toolkit to record your thoughts and as a medium for communication and collaboration within the school and with your external parties. Schools also see its potential in facilitating the sharing of practices, joint activities, or perhaps collaborative funding bids. If you're using the toolkit, please do tell us in your application how this has supported you in bringing together your application for the proposed project you are applying for. Deadlines for applications to this fund is midday on the 30th of April, with decisions being made in a June grants committee, after which we will share the decisions with you. Our email for queries is on the slide, but please note we cannot discuss specific project IDs with you. So to apply, please head to the Trust website at covenantfund.org.uk. Look for our Find Funding tab, and there you'll find our guidance, our FAQs, and our application form. We highly recommend using Word to plan your application answers and copying them into the application portal. It is a little bit temperamental, and if you're in there, please save every 5 minutes at least. So that brings me to the end of the very quick presentation for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope I've got some time or so some questions. If I don't, then please do reach out to us on the email that was provided.